Now, though, a busy day for Politics Live.
As the dust settles on a dramatic and sweeping reshuffle, can Rishi Sunak keep the right of the party on side? This is Politics Live. Joining me in the studio, Conservative MP Conor Burns, Labour's Shadow Culture Secretary Thangam Debonair, The Guardian's political editor Pippa Crerar and Talk TV's international editor Isabel Oakeshott. Today,
we've had 30 years of a political system which incentivises the easy decision, not the right one. Be in no doubt, it is time for a change, and we are it.
that was just 5 weeks ago. Rishi Sunak pitching himself as a candidate for change. But yesterday's reshuffle saw a return of the old guard. What will David Cameron's return mean for the direction of the party? There are already warnings from supporters of the former Home Secretary.
We're trying to stop the likes of Starmer getting in number 10, and we cannot do that with Rishi Sunak.
The Prime Minister has now put himself on the side of not controlling migration and not being tough on crime.
And as police warn of the strain of weekly protests, should laws around demonstrations be tightened up? Well, a dramatic 24 hours during which a former Prime Minister returns to the Cabinet and is put in the House of Lords, and the Home Secretary is sacked in a wide-ranging and broad reshuffle in which Rishi Sunak is broadly seen to have moved his government to the centre ahead of a general election. Let's have a look at some of the front pages. We have the Daily Mail, reshuffle that rocked Westminster, Rishi's big throw of the dice. You can see both David Cameron and Esther McVey. We'll talk about her in a moment. Let's roll over to the Daily Telegraph. Cameron's return sparks Brexiteer backlash. And finally, in the Mirror, same old Tories, literally back where we began, with a picture of David Cameron, now Lord Cameron. My opening question to the panel, starting with you, Conor, is will this make any difference to the fortunes of the Conservative Party?
The short answer to that is no. What my constituents and people around the country will be looking at when the next election comes is the choice between a government led by Rishi Sunak with what he wants to do with his own mandate and a government led by Keir Starmer and what he wants to do. Reshuffles, I view the reshuffle from the detachment of somebody who made it clear I didn't want to be part of it. I'm very happy doing my trade envoy work in the US, and I relish being the Member of Parliament for Bournemouth West.
You'd have turned down a promotion?
Absolutely. I was very clear after last year that my new roles are clear and I'm enjoying them.
And so you don't think any of this, the return? Yeah.
So I think David will bring something to the Cabinet. He's extremely experienced. He won a general election. He will provide good advice. He'll represent the UK well on the international stage. But the idea that in my own constituency that people are thinking, do you know what, looking at this reshuffle and who he's appointed to the Whip's office and who's the new Under Secretary of State for whatever is going to determine how I'm going to vote next time. No, it isn't. Competence and a vision will be what will determine the next election.
What difference do you think it will make to the party's fortunes?
Well, I can't see any difference. And I'm just thinking of people I've talked to in Tory seats that are where people are thinking of how they're going to vote at the next election, who are worried about their mortgages that are still spiralling after the disastrous budget last year, Tory budget. They're thinking about their rents, they're thinking about bills, they're worried about whether or not the NHS is going to make it through the winter. That gave us nothing yesterday. And in fact, it didn't just give us nothing, it sent us back in time to a Prime Minister who is by and large responsible for an awful lot of the damage that we're experiencing today. So what we're facing now, I think, is a choice between more of the same, of 13 years of national decline, of stagnating growth and productivity, or a decade of national renewal with Keir Starmer's
So you would agree that
Party.
reshuffles on both sides, your recent one and our recent one, both won't alter the fundamentals of the choice at the next election between Sunak and Starmer. These things are internal Westminster bubble stuff, aren't they?
What matters is policy.
Yes.
I actually disagree with you that it won't make any difference, but I don't think it'll make a difference in the way that Rishi Sunak hopes it will. I think the move towards the centre ground is a lost cause. I think that ground has already been ceded, whether to Keir Starmer or perhaps to the Lib Dems, who we know, well, Sir Ed Davey is a pretty invisible Lib Dem leader. They're very good at a constituency.
They've done quite well in the by-elections, though, haven't they?
I think the fight now is for the right. And I can tell you that yesterday, some 320 people joined the Reform Party. People don't join political parties very, very readily, do they? So to get 320 members in that space of time certainly tells you something. And I think also there is this issue of Brexit. It's not a small matter. 17.4 million people voted for it and expected it to be delivered. We now have both a Chancellor and a Foreign Secretary who did not believe in Brexit, and there's no sign that they will do anything to deliver the promise.
But of course there were the years of Boris Johnson who did believe in Brexit, and those might point to that being a lost opportunity. What do you think, difference-wise, it will make?
I agree with Isabel that there is going to be a battle for the right, but I don't think that battle for the right is one which is going to determine the outcome of the election. I think that runs on in parallel up until the election, and then should the Conservatives lose it, that's when it kind of explodes into the mainstream. The battle for the election will be fought on the centre ground. Battles for elections are always fought on the centre ground. That's not to say what's going on the right doesn't have an impact, because of course there'll be lots of seats where Reform stand candidates where they potentially could take away enough votes from from the Conservatives and let Labour through, and then they could take them.
Which is what we saw in the by-elections. It's not that it's very easy for any smaller political party to suddenly win lots of seats, but what they can do is deprive other political parties of them.
But I think what we're seeing here in terms of Rishi Sunak's decision is, as lots of the papers have said this morning, lots of commentators have said, a last roll of the dice. He's tried pretty much everything so far to try and shift the dial and to close that polling gap with Labour. We saw it at party conference, which was overshadowed by HS2. We saw that in Nick King's speech, which was overshadowed by Suella Braverman's tense rhetoric. And now he has this opportunity with the reshuffle to try and shift the dial, to try and say to people, look, we are a serious, credible, grown-up party. The autumn statement's another opportunity next week. But I think, as you know, your politician guests have suggested, the personalities around the table will have very little impact for people sitting at home deciding how to vote. It's the policies that will matter.
Well, despite that, we're going to have a look at who's in, who's out and who's been reshuffled. Let's take a look at these images. David Cameron, Lord Cameron as Foreign Secretary, Laura Trott as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, big promotion for Victoria Atkins to becoming Health Secretary. Richard Holden has gone to be Conservative Party Chair, and Esther McVeigh, you saw in the headlines, Minister without portfolio. If we roll on to the ones who are out, yes, the dramatic sacking of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Therese Coffey was Environment Secretary, and Rachel McLean has left her role as Housing Minister. And then there were those who were moved. James Cleverly from Foreign Secretary to Home Secretary, Steve Barclay in a sideways or perhaps a demotion from Health to Environment Secretary, and Greg Hands, who was Party Chairman, is now a Business Minister. We've now can have a look at the pictures of the newly appointed cabinet. There they all are in all their glory, meeting for the very first time. And Rishi Sunak made some introductory remarks and a wry comment about the return of David Cameron.
Warm welcome to those for whom it's their first cabinet, and also welcome to those for whom it may not be their first time. Lovely to have you all here. Now, our purpose is nothing less than to make the long-term decisions that are going to change our country for the better, and I know that this strong and united team is going to deliver that change for everybody.
That was the first cabinet meeting. The chief political correspondent for the BBC is at Central Lobby, where MPs are gathering or loitering. No doubt you've been talking to them. What do they make of the reshuffle, Henry?
I think every MP I've spoken to was as bamboozled by David Cameron's return to the political fray as I was, and frankly still am. That completely came out of nowhere. Really closely guarded secret in number 10. Rishi Sunak's famously tight-knit inner circle managed to keep it to themselves. We're told it was in the offing for roughly a week, and that's fascinating because that suggests the talks with David Cameron began before the controversial article that Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, wrote in the Times. And that, by the way, is the direction that a lot of the conversations I'm having this morning are going in. We were all very excited by David Cameron, Lord Cameron, as I need to get used to calling him, yesterday. But now people really interrogating what the sacking of Suella Braverman means for the future of the Conservative Party.
Right, and what do you think it does mean in terms of the future direction of the party?
Well, as the government themselves conceded yesterday, there was a problem with Suella Braverman's language. Cabinet minister after cabinet minister was on programmes like this, having to defend repeatedly, or in some cases choosing not to defend, what the Home Secretary had said. And I think eventually Downing Street just ran out of patience with that. They thought it was not a sustainable position. I think on the substance, Rishi Sunak's position on a lot of issues hasn't actually been that distant from Suella Braverman's. She's definitely a bit to the right of him, but on some issues, I'm not sure there's that much of a difference. But certainly some of her supporters, some MPs on the right of the Conservative Party, are anxious that the reshuffle yesterday might mean that Rishi Sunak is moving in a slightly different direction. Of course, we can't discuss this without mentioning that tomorrow is going to be a huge day for the Conservative Party's approach to immigration, for the Conservative Party's approach to small boats, because that's when the Supreme Court will rule on the legality or otherwise of the Rwanda policy, which until yesterday morning was Suella Braverman's flagship policy.
Henry Zevman there at Central Lobby. Thank you very much. Connor, this idea that he's moved to the centre ground, Rishi Sunak, that's what he's done with this reshuffle, that he's failed to ride both horses, if you like, those seats in the red wall areas that were won in 2019 and the blue wall areas in the South traditional Tory areas, and he's picked a side. Has he done the right thing?
I just don't buy it. In terms of the central policies of the government, they remain unchanged. There was reference to the Supreme Court decision tomorrow on the Rwanda transport plan for asylum processing. Everyone in Cabinet is agreed, everyone in the parliamentary party, as far as I know, is agreed that that is the right way to proceed, that we've got to have an answer to the numbers that are coming in. In my own constituency, I have a number of hotels that are full of people waiting for their claims to be processed. It's terribly unfair on them as well, by the way, as well as the taxpayer and so on. I think a lot of this is got-up media stuff. Now, Suella raised a number of valid points. I think there's big questions about the way she went about raising some of them. I think
but you agree with her broadly?
Well, hang on. I agree certainly on what she said around policing. I think that is a legitimate area to have a discussion with. And the idea that the politician should not have a view on what the police should be doing or what the police priority should be is a nonsense. I think those were legitimate things. I think to do it in the way it was done in an article, I certainly thought, I said this the other day in Northern Ireland, to be talking about Ulster.
But did Rishi Sunak do the right thing to get rid of her then? They'd had enough of her, they were sick of her.
Every Prime Minister, every leader of the opposition chooses the team they want.
Right.
He chose not to have Suella in his team.
Right.
James Cleverly is hardly a shrinking violet of the left.
Well, that may be true.
I'm not particularly strident either, and I think you're rather playing...
You want strident people?
I want strident people, yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Sure
I think we need people who are going to reflect the point of view that Suella Braverman expressed.
You don't have to be strident to do that.
Well, you've got to be very clear in where you stand on issues, and I think a lot of voters are not looking for on the one hand or on the other. They're looking for clear direction. And you're playing down the significance of personalities, but we all know that personalities and where they individually stand on issues makes a huge difference in politics. And I'm sure it's not going to be entirely convenient if things don't go the government's way on Wednesday to be reminded that David Cameron, as a leader of the party, expressed the desire that immigration, the ambition, should come down to the tens of thousands. He is now in charge of the Foreign Office, in charge of our foreign policy, and he's clearly not signed up.
Yes, he is.
Well, he's signed up to it, but he was repeatedly unable to deliver
and asylum are the preserve of the Home Office, and the Prime Minister has appointed James Cleverly to be the Home Secretary in the government he leads, and the policy has not changed. So
but it's not deliverable, that's the problem.
That's a different argument. The policy is the policy of the government. The Prime Minister has appointed as Home Secretary someone who agrees and believes in that policy.
Right, so
will respond tomorrow.
Do you not agree with William Hague, then, who was broadly seen to have perhaps brokered the return of David Cameron, what he calls the return of rational, respectful politics, which offers the best chance at the election?
But William I have a great admiration for. I walked through enemy lines as one of William's candidates in 2001. William's a commentator now. William's a columnist now. He writes articles. I agree that David Cameron will make a contribution to thoughtful decision-making around the cabinet table. But I don't believe that this reshuffle, as indeed any reshuffle, opposition or government, has fundamentally changed the policies of the team.
I mean, Keir Starmer reached a similar conclusion, didn't he, Thangham, that actually bringing Labour back to the centre ground was the only way to look like a party of government. So you shouldn't be criticising Rishi Sunak for doing exactly the same thing.
I'm criticising Rishi Sunak for poor judgment and weak leadership. I mean, he shouldn't have appointed Suella Braverman to Home Secretary in the first place. 6 days, I think it was, since she'd been found to breach national security guidelines. Since then, she has undermined the operational effectiveness, or attempted to undermine the operational effectiveness of the police with public criticism that, frankly, does no service to the people we should be serving, who want there to be effective policing on the streets. Now, thankfully, our police are strong and they know that they should be free of political interference, but that was a disgraceful attempt last week. And Rishi Sunak's weak leadership to keep her there, to put her there in the first place, I think that's very telling. I think it's also interesting if William Hague is saying a return to sensible government, or whatever the wording was. So he's basically saying that the previous Tory government didn't have that. I would agree, but is that really going to get the Tory politicians re-elected? I don't think so. They'll be judged on their record.
I think we do need just a bit of a history check here, though, because it's not entirely unusual for Home Secretaries to be at variance with the police. It's not unusual or even necessarily wrong. I don't think it's necessarily wrong for the Home Secretary in their position to hold the police to account, to give direction to the police. That is leadership, and it's not fundamentally wrong or politicising the police.
No, it is.
She is an elected, or was an elected politician in that role. The police are not.
Or did she want to get sacked? Is that the reason that in the end she did and said some of the things that she did, Suella Braverman, in the tone that you say perhaps wasn't always appropriate because she wanted to be sacked?
Well, if that's what she wanted, she succeeded in her objective. I can't see inside Suella Braverman's mind. I know the Prime Minister's made the decision he's made, the team he wants. Look, if we look back to the last election, you guys wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be the Prime Minister. So let's just be a little bit cautious. And you put forward Diane Abbott, who had some very questionable things to say about what modern policing in the United Kingdom should look at.
Both of whom are no longer Labour.
Well, indeed, a little bit of contrition, I think, perhaps, wouldn't go amiss.
Right. Well, Sharon Graham, of course, General Secretary of Unite, called Keir Starmer's Labour Party a 90s tribute band. So also referring perhaps back to policies under the Blair and Brown era.
Who took us into government 3 times and was able to change the country as a result. That's what I'm desperate to do, is to change the country for the better, to be able to rescue our public services. I mean, we've got school roofs that are crumbling because David Cameron's government cancelled the school building programme. There are so many things that we can lay at the door of David Cameron, and believe me, we're going to do.
You know that's not correct.
I don't. I believe that it is correct.
He cancelled building schools for the future, which was a terribly inefficient and wasteful regime.
All of the secondary
and we carried on building new schools. I'm opening one, laying the ground in 2 weeks' time.
And all of the secondary schools that have got RAC in them at the moment would have been dealt with if he hadn't done that. Now, that's really important, that we're clear about the consequences of the actions of the coalition government, which undermined our public services to such a degree that people today look around them and say nothing's working, and they're desperate for a general election. And if Rishi Sunak, who is, in my view, incredibly weak, if he really wants to change the country, he needs to go to the country so we can get a general election.
Is David Cameron wanting to rewrite or improve the legacy he left by returning?
Well, that's a suggestion that a lot of people have made. His friends, of course, deny it and say that it's about public duty, it's about public service. It's feeling that he wants to do his bit at a difficult time, a fragile time for the global order. But it's hard to escape the feeling. Anybody that sort of has followed what he's been up to since he left government, he's looked a bit listless.
Figure,
he has
a little bit down on his
in his shepherd's heart.
And he hasn't sort of like landed in a big international job or sort of doing something which looks like he feels it's particularly purposeful. So it does feel like a little bit of this is trying to rewrite the narrative and give him personally a different type of legacy than the one he left behind.
Right. Well, we've already heard from some on the right of the party who support Suella Braverman and perhaps her leadership ambitions. Andrea Jenkins, Conservative MP, tweeted this yesterday: "Enough is enough. I have submitted my vote of no confidence letter to the chairman of the 1922, that's backbench Tory MPs, the head of them. It's time for Rishi Sunak to go and replace him with a real Conservative Party leader." And picking up on something that Isabel has said, we can look at this headline on an op-ed written by David Frost, the former Brexit minister. "Voters deserve better than a return to a failed pre-Brexit past. With the sacking of Suella Braverman, the Tory party has finally given up on key Conservative policies. Connor, how much of a danger are they going to be on the backbenches with this backlash?
Well, look, the first thing, I feel so sorry for David Cameron. He got so much criticism for walking away in 2016. He's now come back. He's getting criticism for coming back.
It's been quite a large gap,
It's the personification of politicians not being able to win.
And on this...
Look, on the fundamentals, I mean, David Frost's point, I read David's article with interest. Brexit's been delivered. We've left the European Union. The argument, this is interesting, is the argument now is what we do with it.
Right.
But legally, it is a reality. And it would be a very courageous politician now who would seek to try and reverse that decision and repeal that law that has taken us outside the European Union. It's should be a legitimate contemporary debate.
No one's suggesting. But what about what David Frost is saying? How dangerous is David Frost and other Suella Braverman supporters? They've now got somebody they can rally around as a future leader on the right.
There are plenty of things that legitimately we should be talking about. We should be talking about what the right burden of tax is, how we get growth going in the economy, how we improve our public services, how we take the opportunities of Brexit as we're doing with trade agreements around the world. Those are all legitimate debates for a party in government to be having. But I have to say to my colleagues, if you want to do we talked about a 1990s Tribute Act, if you want
but they're not having these. They're not having these discussions in government. That's why.
This would be, Joe, my message to my colleagues. If you want to do this in public, if you want to undermine another Prime Minister, then be prepared for the electoral whirlwind that you will reap.
And it looks like they're doing it as well, doesn't it? I mean, so everything we're hearing from people around Suella Braverman over the last 24 hours since she was sacked, I mean, she herself said, basically, watch this space, I'll make comments in due course. And the suggestion seems to be that when the Supreme Court ruling is made tomorrow morning, then will be the moment that she comes out with potentially, depending on which way the result goes, something quite explosive. If it goes against the government, then the suggestion that she will point the finger of blame at Rishi Sunak for dragging his feet and slowing down the process towards getting the Rwanda policy in place and doing something about small boats coming across the channel.
I mean, far from rallying around Suella Braverman, I mean, Pippa's paper is reporting, I think this morning, that there was hardly anybody at the meeting of the, whatever they're called, 13.
And you agree with that?
Are they all just busy filling in job application forms or buffing up their CVs or something? Because where were they if that was really rallying around the new candidate of the right?
Is it going to be a damn squib
I'm on the right of the party. Some of my best friends are on the right of the party, and I wasn't at the meeting. I wasn't even aware of the meeting.
That's not very good organisation.
Well, no, I think it speaks to the fact that there are a very small number. I mean, I listened to Andrea and I saw Andrea's tweet. Andrew Bridgen's not in the party anymore. There's a gap in the market. Somebody's got to fill it. But I don't think that this is a groundswell of opinion within the Parliament.
No, it's not going to go anywhere.
No, it's not.
But how much damage, Isabel, could Suella Braverman cause if, as Pippa says, she says she's going to bide her time, but maybe only until tomorrow?
I'll tell you how much damage she can cause. If she reveals that behind the scenes, number 10, Rishi Sunak in particular, has been undermining consistently her efforts to stop the boats, I think that is absolute dynamite. So let's see what she has to say on that, because if she has not had the support from Downing Street that they have professed to give her, then that is seismic. Unless your party can sort out immigration, and frankly, it's really arguably far too late. We've already got far, far too many people have come in since the pledges that the party has made. But unless that can be gripped very, very quickly, then I think all hope of minimising your losses at the polls will be lost.
Do you agree?
I agree that immigration and the numbers coming
so it's a moment of maximum danger.
And look, I've engaged in this very strongly because the numbers of hotels that we have in my own constituency that should be used for tourism and the like. And I have to say, I found Robert Jenrick, Suella, the Home Office, number 10, very supportive on this. We've done the deal with Albania. The numbers are coming down. We're beginning to bring some of those hotels back into proper use.
Was stop the boats,
yes, and that is, I believe, making progress. But if Suella has stuff to say, she'll say it.
And in terms of Labour's policy, is it still the case that if the Rwanda policy to outsource and process asylum claims for people coming over on small boats to the UK does go ahead, it gets the go-ahead from the Supreme Court, they say it's legal, you would still reverse it, whether or not successful if you win the election?
We've said, it's an expensive policy, it's yet to show any impact, but also what Connor's failing to point out is that the backlog is of the Tories creating. There are people who've been waiting for their decisions to be made, and for frankly, years, I have people in Bristol West who've been waiting for far too long, and that means that people who shouldn't be here are staying here, as well as people who do have the right to be here. Sure, and that's a backlog of the Tory government.
That's clear then on the Rwanda policy. Is Labour also still committed to bringing down the levels of net migration or not?
Well, it's difficult to say where migration is going to be in even a few months' time. So actually making a prediction for what we do in
probably still quite hard.
That's
But
quite
is
a
it
bringing down the
question.
backlog is really important.
Yeah, but what about the levels of
Dealing
net
with-
migration?
Well, at the moment we have different needs in the labour market.
Right.
We have a refugee crisis that hasn't been dealt with by this
that's a
government.
no.
So I think it's very difficult
a
for
no.
any responsible politician to make a prediction about where immigration is even going to go. We expect it to go down,
No, the
but I would
question
like
is
to
not
see
what you think will happen, but whether you are
And I think-
committed to bringing the
I
number
think a
down, to actually
government-
doing things to
a
bring it
government
down.
that says it wants to bring
That's
the
a no
number
then.
down, a government that
That's a no.
keeps saying it wants to bring the number down and does nothing about the backlog is frankly an ineffective,
Well, we are
weak
putting
government.
more
Well, it's a
resources-
record, but it is at record
You
high.
created the
It's a
backlog and
record
it's a
high net
record.
I accept
migration.
that.
That's a really important
it's extremely
admission, I have to
important.
say.
And we have
That-
signed the return agreement with Albania that has seen the numbers coming down. If the Rwanda policy gets the go-ahead from the court tomorrow, that will act as a massive deterrent to
Well, they
more
can just
people
take
coming.
1%
And what we
of
have
the
just
time.
heard from the Labour Party
They
is that
won't
they will
commit.
get rid of that,
And
and
they
it will
won't
be
commit.
come on in.
Right, well, that was clear. On the Suella Braverman and what she may or may not say, and it is speculation tomorrow following that outcome of the court ruling, if the government loses, will it put the issue of the European Convention of Human Rights back on the table, Connor, and should it, us leaving it?
Firstly, I obviously hope the government
I
does not lose
understand that.
tomorrow, and I believe, having looked at it carefully, that there are pretty sound
if they
reasons why
don't?
they should win. Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, has said that if the court does not go with the government, that the government has a policy ready to announce on that. I imagine that a minister will come quickly to Parliament to announce that. I will reserve judgment to see what the court says and what the government's response is before pre-announcing, deciding what I would like the government.
But should that issue,
do.
because it has been discussed, and Suella Braverman
I
has
think we're-
certainly
look,
raised it,
I
it's the
think-
European Convention.
I
It
think
has.
where
I
Isabel
don't-
is absolutely right on this, and where my constituents are absolutely right on this, and where I'm afraid telling them it's divergent from the mainstream of the British public here. The British public want our borders controlled. They want to reduce the
you're
numbers
not.
coming in,
And you're not.
and they want a robust policy that actually works.
Right, but
And
it has
not working.
But as you say,
Albania is
but as
part
you
of that.
say,
Rwanda
the Tory,
is part of that.
consecutive Tory governments have failed to do what they set out to do ever since 2010.
I'm not
and certainly,
conceding-
no,
I'm
absolutely.
conceding that the
But just
numbers
to
are
make
difficult.
that clear, do you think that will be an issue when now we will have a prime minister, still the same, a foreign secretary, and a home secretary, none of whom are in favour of the UK leaving the ECHR?
I think it's highly unlikely to happen. And what we've seen in the last few months is various government figures, including Rishi Sunak, sort of flirting with the right as a sort of I guess, a tactic to keep them on board by refusing to rule out the possibility of leaving the ECHR. I can't see it happening.
Never
They're not
happens.
going to want to be, as James cleverly said when he was at the Foreign Office, he doesn't want to be in a club that also includes Russia and Belarus by withdrawing from an international treaty that the UK was involved in creating, and which would damage not just us diplomatically, but our international reputation with our nearest geographical allies, but also further afield too.
And we're going to return to, obviously, that decision tomorrow when we'll be covering Prime Minister's questions. That will already have been made, that decision, actually just beforehand. And then there may well be a vote on a ceasefire in the afternoon with the King's Speech debate. So an awful lot going on tomorrow. Just very briefly, just to you, Connor, what did you make of Esther McVey, former Cabinet Minister, being made what someone has called a common sense czar? What does that mean?
Lord knows. Esther's a very effective parliamentarian.
Well, that's honest, I suppose.
Very effective minister. When I used to attend meetings in the Cobra room in the Cabinet Office, Esther was always succinct and incisive in what she said.
And full of common sense?
All my colleagues are full of, well,
Yeah.
not all, most of my colleagues are full of common sense.
Name names.
Some are full of other stuff.
Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph. We've touched on this already. This is about the police and how they police protests. Pro-Palestinian marches every week until Christmas, unsustainable, the police warn. The Met Police Federation chairman says combined impact of demonstrators and Just Stop Oil protests would strain forces' day-to-day resources. What can be done to help the police, Connor?
I have huge sympathy with what the Met Police Federation chair is saying here. The police are saying, they're not saying they can't police them. They are conceding that, yes, they can. They are saying they would have to divert resource from other areas of policing in order to do this. And I think week in, week out demonstrations of the sort we saw last weekend would be unfair on the police, unfair on the public.
So what can you do
terribly
about
unfair
it?
on the shopkeepers in London who are trying to do their business.
If people want to protest, that's their right.
Well, I think we saw at the weekend that discussions between the protest organisers and the police bore some fruit. The number one thing we can do, which we have been doing, is provide the police with extra numbers. In my own area of Dorset, the numbers are up 174. They're now 1,441.
Right, but
There's an extra 3,500.
This is on a slightly different scale, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, Thangan,
The number one thing you can do is actually ban them. I mean, they weren't banned. The Met chief did not apply to the Home Secretary to make an emergency banning order because he claimed that there was insufficient intelligence that there would be serious disorder. Oh, come on! There were like 150 arrests.
The vast majority of whom, according to the Met Police, were on the far right.
It doesn't matter which side they were on. I'm not excusing that.
Possibly encouraged by Suella Braverman with some of her remarks about them.
Don't talk over each other. Sorry, Pippa, finish your point, and then I'll come back to you.
It was just that I think that for the most part, these marches have been peaceful. Saturday's was an exception, and part of the reason it was so inflammatory was because of Suella Braverman's remarks.
Right, and that's what many people say. She stoked the tensions. But out of 300, well, hang on, just to give the figures, out of 300,000 people, yes, there were between 130 and 150 arrests. On balance, you still think they should have been banned?
Absolutely.
Should they be banned? What can you do to help the police, apart from give them more officers?
Not interfere with their operational independence, for a start. Get them more numbers. I think it's a bit rich for any Tory politician to say we're boosting the numbers when they were the ones that cut them. Labour Party will bring back 13,000 new police officers funded by efficiency savings in purchasing. But I think the important thing here is the right to protest is part of our status as a democracy, something we should be proud of. And if the police say there is no legal basis on which to apply for a ban, we have to respect that.
Well, except that your colleague sitting here, front benchers, did agree. Jenny Chapman actually was the first to say she didn't think the march should have gone ahead on Armistice Day.
The police make that decision, and they said that there was no legal basis to apply for a ban, and the disgraceful behaviour of some protesters, and yes, there was some horrific anti-Semitic posters on view, which I deeply deprecate, and I hope the police are able to take the action they say they're going to. And there was some violence from the far-right demonstrators, and I agree with Pippa, stoked up by the previous former Home Secretary, which was attacking the police, which is outrageous, as well as the attempted attacks on the cenotaph, or certainly attempting to approach the cenotaph.
Right, would you agree then with the Prime Minister, the Sun headline, never again, Rishi Sunak orders major tightening of protest laws after Armistice Day was blighted by hate-filled mobs. As Pippa was mentioning, much of that was actually fuelled by, or counter-protest by those on the far right, as well as some extremist elements within the pro-Palestinian march. Would you agree that there needs to be major tightening of protest laws?
I've no idea what that headline actually means, but I do know that Rishi Sunak appointed a Home Secretary who decided it was OK, not just to try and undermine the police, but to stoke up division, where what was needed last week was calming things down and trying to bring people together.
Well, as some of the things suggested, new laws drawn up to stop people climbing on statues, scaffolding and bus stops during protests, lowering the threshold at which police can ban marches and protests, and ministers are looking at ways to restrict certain chants and songs being sung. Would you have any problem with that?
I don't know which chants, I don't know which songs, and I have no idea what that means in terms of climbing statues. We have laws already.
I think you probably
we
do
have
know.
laws
I think
already.
you probably do know.
We
It's not
have
really difficult
laws
to understand.
already against disorder, against incitement to racial hatred, and I have faith in the police, knowing how to apply those laws, and they are. I believe when the police are saying that they are taking action to act on intelligence, to make moves on those who were attempting to incite racial hatred at the weekend, I have faith in them.
Right. I mean, in 2021, you wrote on your website that the crime and sentencing bill that introduced new protest restrictions, that it would damage our democracy, and that this year's Public Order Act restricted freedoms around the vital democratic right to peaceful protests. So are you saying you'd repeal these things? You'd go even further?
I think it's important that the right to peaceful protest is defended, and that includes people with whom we disagree. We have laws against incitement to racial hatred, we have laws against riots, and I think it's important that we defend the right of people with whom we disagree to make their views known, to be policed appropriately and proportionately by the police.
And do you think that's what happened with these protests? Do you think it is right for people to be able to sing songs or make certain chants that many people regard as anti-Semitic?
If they are incitement to racial hatred, I have complete faith that the police will take action.
Connor? Do we need extra laws? Do we need new laws? Or is it that the police aren't applying them properly?
So, look,
we can see, actually, the police here at the demonstration trying to keep calm.
I said earlier that I thought some of the stuff that Suella Braverman had said was legitimate areas for debate, and that was what were the priorities of the police. I think there is no doubt we have seen from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We all now know what that means. We have seen flags and symbols that are for terrorist organisations, and we have not seen interventions. We saw those yobbos, those hooligans, those football supporting thugs on the streets. I wouldn't call them far right. The idea that they're inspired by any political ideology is nonsense. These are morons. And the police were absolutely right to challenge them. But I had an email from somebody last week who said, the police will now caution someone and intervene with somebody with their eyes closed, adjacent, but quite a distance from an abortion clinic, but they'll see a terrorist symbol walking past in central London on display. What is the difference in the police response to that? I think that is a legitimate question.
Yeah. Right. I mean, this, of course, is referring to Suella Braverman's comments about the police playing favourites or being biased. But how helpful is that, those sorts of comments, when you've got major demonstrations to police?
Well, I think she raised a really interesting debate, and I don't think, to be clear, that the police are somehow highly politicised, but I think they are extremely conscious and acutely aware of the backlash that comes from certain parts of our politics if they are not seen to be if they're seen to do the politically incorrect thing. Connor raises a really extraordinary case of the young woman who was whisked away from standing silently outside an abortion clinic. But then we go back to the Black Lives Matter rallies. Huge numbers of people were allowed to gather in Parliament Square and around central London in the early days of the pandemic. Guess what marches were banned? Anyone marching against lockdown or questioning the vaccine. That's not even-handed policing.
I mean, Pippa, it does feel as if the police have come in for quite a lot of criticism about not playing fair.
Along with everything else.
Yeah, along with everything else. And yet they would say operationally their main priority is to de-escalate. So they do make decisions that might not look fair, but they try and reduce the likelihood of an outbreak of violence.
Look, I think they've got a really hard job to do, and every day they will be analysing intelligence and information from the ground, from conversations they have with march organisers, protest organisers, to try and establish what the best way forward is. I don't want to sit here and second guess any of that information. I don't know what they have available to them. But, you know, there is a broad problem more generally about confidence and faith in the police and the police's decisions, particularly at the Met. Got a new Met Commissioner in place. He must be feeling the pressure right now. It's right that we all hold the police to account. It's right that people challenge them about some of the decisions they make. But it's also right that they are granted that operational independence to make decisions based on information that they have that we can't possibly.
Let's have a look at this, finally, in the Times on deep fakes. UK News. Deep fakes could disrupt next British election. GCHQ warns AI almost certain to be used to create misinformation, according to security chiefs. It's a fresh report out by the National Cyber Security Centre warning deep fake videos and hyper-realistic bots will almost certainly make the spread of disinformation during campaigns easier and disrupt elections. Of course, we're looking ahead to a general election most likely next year. And the MI5 chief says that deepfakes are a threat to democracy. Now, we have two examples that we already know about. BBC News, fake audio of Sadiq Khan, that's Labour's mayor in London, is not a crime, says the Met. That's because there was audio purporting to capture the mayor of London calling for Armistice Day to be rescheduled for a pro-Palestinian march. They said it didn't constitute a criminal offence. There's also been fake audio of Keir Starmer being grumpy and sweary at party conference. Well, being grumpy, I suppose, might not be completely out of character for a politician at conference. But generally, how worrying and how worried are you about this and the increase of it in an election campaign?
Well, I'm incredibly worried because, you know, I don't want fake information putting out there about any political party putting forward their case. I think it's also problematic that deepfakes can apply to many, many people who are not politicians. Women who've had their faces superimposed on pornographic images, who are experiencing, as a result, horrific abuse. Now, I think that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, missed an opportunity recently at his AI conference. AI offers a great future for so many things, for the early diagnosis of cancer, for all sorts of things that we're already benefiting from, but it also carries the potential to damage our democracy and damage lives. And he seemed to be saying he was not really that bothered to go into regulation anytime soon. Now, a Labour Party, if we are going to win the next general election, we will regulate, because we think it's important that democracy is protected, but also that the potential for national security to be compromised and individual people's lives to be ruined, that must be dealt with.
Well, on that example then of the fake audio of Sadiq Khan and the Met saying it's not a crime, would you make that a criminal offence?
Well, at the moment we're exploring what the options are, but I think it's important that the police are given tools in order to be able to defend our democracy, and it will harm us all if there's fake information about Connor's party just as much as there is fake information about ours. That's not good for democracy. We need people to have accurate information.
It will be difficult to regulate them,
and just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Can you imagine the torrent of stuff that there is going to be, and you could tie yourself in knots for absolutely ever,
and just
trying to trace where they come back from.
And this is the key
these
point.
videos. And I think it is very difficult, because this stuff is sophisticated. It's really good.
Well, it's got a lot better.
One. I mean, I was quite taken in by it.
Were you?
The problem is that by the time it is conclusively shown to have been a fake, the damage is already done.
And what does that do to trust in the media?
Well, I mean, I think this is important to make a distinction between more mainstream media brands like the ones Isabel and I work for, and what's going on social media that individuals put out. And there is a real challenge for organisations like ours to check that information, like picture
and you
desks
all want to be first, don't you, with a story?
Yes.
You know, very easy to be first and very
So we
wrong.
have a real responsibility to make sure that our fact-checking and our picture checking and audio checking is absolutely, that we interrogate it and make sure that it's accurate. It also places an onus on us, I think, to make sure that our output across all the different broadcast media is accurate and is factually accurate and not misleading. Because I think as more of this stuff comes out, and Isabel's right, the damage is done by the time it's already out there. We need to be able to provide people with other options for trustworthy, accurate information.
Should this sort of thing be a crime? The example that we used of the fake audio, Isabel said it was very convincing of Sadiq Khan. The Met says it's not a crime. It doesn't constitute a crime for all the reasons that we're discussing.
So, look, yes, it probably should. But I think we've got to have a degree of modesty in understanding what we can do unilaterally as a country in our own legal system with this stuff. That's why I welcome the Prime Minister bringing the 28 countries together and the Bletchley Declaration. This stuff doesn't recognise borders. For some time I chaired the all-party group on financial fraud and scamming, and one of the great challenges was once money's moved or people operated their domain overseas, it was very hard to find people through a single judicial system. So we've got to be internationalist on this. We've got to bring as many people in on this as possible, but the risks of it are absolutely enormous. We mustn't get into gestures. We will legislate. This is international, this is global, this is the World Wide Web.
And there's also a challenge for us in that where are people consuming their news? And, forgive me, but I think an awful lot of people are not consuming their news from any of your outlets. They're consuming it from different places on the internet. And there's a challenge for us there about how we help people to be able to disentangle what is fake, what is true, and that's going to be tricky.
Well, how do you do it? I mean, unless you do legislate or regulate, there is the argument. I mean, you take the EU, for example. They have decided to go down a more regulatory route, which perhaps isn't surprising. But perhaps that is the right way, Connor.
Well, I think it's got to be bringing people together on scale. We've got to get more and more countries involved in this. I know the Prime Minister got some criticism for involving China on this, and that's hugely controversial, but a lot of this stuff will emanate from China. We've got to really run the hard yards here to try and build a global response to what is going to be a globally policed problem.
Do you think also, though, Connor, I mean, I would say that as politicians, we really need to get on board soon, because my fear is that the speed of this technology is much too fast for our legislative process.
Absolutely.
And I think we really have to be able to work out how, for instance, does Ofcom have the right tools? Have we got the right regulatory framework? Are there the right sanctions? But we need, as well as citizens, to be helping each other, and as media outlets, that's a joint task.
By the way, I normally hate this phrase about taking things out of politics, but this is about the whole institution and operation of our international order. We all need to work together on this.
How much is it going to be a disruption in the elections, not just here, but in the US?
It's a risk, isn't it?
It has the potential to be
It
quite
really
serious.
does.
We've already seen it in the States with
Yes.
Republican attack ads on Joe Biden, suggesting that he was calling people up for the draft. It's already out there, it's happening here. It's going to be a big problem at the election.
That's all we have time for. Thank you to all of my guests for today. And as we've been discussing, another big day in Westminster tomorrow. So please join me and my guests for Prime Minister's Questions, starting here, though, at 11:15. From all of us, have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Welcome to a brand new series of Match of the Day
Top 10 podcast.